all these authors that I keep meaning to read, but it just doesn't happen. And I don't know why. I read over 200 freaking books a year, so why do these specific authors never make it in? It's just like, I think all the time, oh, I really need to read so-and-so, and then freaking 5 minutes later I pick up a book by someone else. It's like magic. Someone is wiping these books from my brain so that I never read these authors. So, I'm making a video about it so I cannot forget. You guys can hold me accountable to actually read these authors. To make this list, these authors had to, 1, obviously be authors I'd never read before, and 2, not be on any of my active TBR lists that I was going to be reading in the near future anyway. So, without further ado, here are my top 10 unread authors. Mary Roach. I remember when Stiff came out 13 years ago. It was considered such a provocative book, a hip, new, irreverent non-fiction book about dead bodies. It was making non-fiction cool again, and I really wanted to read it. And 13 years later, I still really want to read it. And the 5 books she's written since then. 13 years. 13 years. I have read well over 1,000 books in that period. One of them should have been Stiff. Evelyn Woolf. I'm going to be honest, I have no idea how to say his name. And yes, this is a man whose life spanned the early to mid 20th century. True story, his first wife was also named Evelyn. He was considered the greatest satirical novelist of his day, and I like satire. His most famous book is Brideshead Revisited, which has been sitting on my list for eons, but there's just been more prestigious classics I think, oh, I should read that first. That could go on forever. I should really just read this now. Virginia Woolf. She also lived in the early 20th century. She was a highly influential modernist writer who struggled with mental illness. They think she was probably bipolar. I'd say her most famous works were Mrs. Dalloway and A Room of One's Own. I think I will start with A Room of One's Own because it's really short, as it's actually just a long essay based on a series of lectures she gave about women writers and women characters. Flannery OConnor. She lived in the mid-20th century and only wrote 2 novels, but a ton of short stories. She's probably the most famous for just her compilation of the complete stories of Flannery OConnor, which is where I will start. John Irving, he's actually still alive. You probably know him for such books as A Prayer for Owen Meany, The World According to Garp, and The Cider House Rules. All books published in the 70s and 80s. Fun side fact, he's an American but lives in Canada. He was a competitive wrestler, and he coached wrestling for a very, very long time. David Mitchell, this dude is also still alive. He's only in his 40s, so that's not a huge surprise. My husband loves him and has been trying to get me to read him for years. And there's no real reason I haven't, except that I just haven't. I watched the movie Cloud Atlas, and I've been meaning to pick up the book. I guess maybe I've just been intimidated by how complex and intense the story seems. Jodi Picoult. I think my difficulty here has been that she's more famous than any of the titles of her individual works, so I just don't know where to start. I'm thinking of My Sister's Keeper, but it sounds really sad. So you guys need to tell me, is that where I start? Do I start somewhere else? Maya Angelou. I mean, this is unforgivable. How could I not have read Maya Angelou? I think part of the problem is I really want to read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings as an audiobook because she narrates it, right? And I think it would be so much more powerful to hear it in her voice, but I just don't have a routine for listening to audiobooks. I read most everything on my Kindle, so it just hasn't happened. When do you guys find is the best time for you to listen to audiobooks? I need to figure out a slot I can make this happen in. David Sedaris, who I always get confused with David Foster Wallace, another author I have not read, but is not on this list because he is already on my literary fiction TBR. I hear they're nothing alike, but they're both Davids who are literary darlings, so I get confused. David Sedaris is a humorist. He became famous when NPR broadcast his essay Santaland Diaries in the 90s. This is probably where I'll start, as the book Santaland Diaries is 6 of his Christmas essays, and it's really short. Alright, for my final author that I really need to read, I pick Judy Blume. As it seems, this is the unread author I'm the most behind on for the longest time, as I was probably supposed to have read her in middle school. I did not. And I still haven't. I don't know, probably because when I want to kick back and relax, I don't immediately think of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But I'm going to pick this up so I can understand all the cultural references to Judy Blume. Plus, my husband bought me her new book In the Unlikely Event on a whim, so now I have to read her. Okay, so that's my top 10 unread authors. Where on this list should I start? Who are the authors you are mortified to admit that you have never read?